Begin today the Gemara, Daf Tezayin Amud towards the bottom of the Yomid, like 10 or 12 lines up from the bottom of the Yomid, where it says, Ochal Tevel o Ma'aser Rishon Chulo. So it's going back to the Mishnah. The first Mishnah in the Pedic says that if one ate Tevel, and that's untithed produce, or Ma'aser Rishon, after you separate the Ma'aser Rishon, you give it to the Levi, he has to separate from that Ma'aser a tenth and give it to the Kohen. He didn't separate the tenth. That's other cases where you chayiv Makos. Omar Rav, so Rav says about this, Ochal Tevel Shal Ma'aser Ani. You eat the produce that was already, the Ma'aser was separated, and that's the Truma Gedaila that was separated, and the Ma'aser Rishon and the Ma'aser Sheni could be separated as well. But then there's another year where instead of giving the Ma'aser Sheni, you give Ma'aser Ani. There's a tenth that is for the poor person. And he separated everything else, but not the Ma'aser Ani. Loike. You get Malkus for this as well. Says the Gemara Kaman, according to who is Rav saying this, Ki Hai Tana. He's following the Tana in this Braisa. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Omer Rabbi Yosi. Yochel, I would think, Lo Yeh Chayiv, that one is not Chayiv Malkus, Ela Ala Tevel. If it's untithed produce, then that means Shlei Hura Mimenu Kolikar. You didn't separate anything from it. However, Hura Mimenu Truma Gedaila, if you gave at least the Truma Gedaila, which is in the average a 50th of what you have, and that goes to the Kayin, when V'loi Hura Mimenu Ma'aser Rishon, but he did not yet separate the Ma'aser Rishon, and it goes to the Levi. Or, in the case of Ma'aser Rishon, he even separated the Ma'aser Rishon as well, but V'loi Ma'aser Sheni, not the Ma'aser Sheni that is brought and eaten in Yerushalayim. Or V'afila Ma'aser Ani. He separated all of that, he did not separate the Ma'aser Ani. Minayin, how do I know that even in such a case, that's in the third year and in the sixth year is when you give Ma'aser Ani, as Rashi here brings. It says in the pasuk Lager La Yasem V'la Almana. So how do I know that even in such a case there's Malkus as well? Talmud Laimar. So the pasuk says Leisucha Lechol B'Sharecha. You should not eat in any of your gates this untithed produce. Now, the simple pshat of that pasuk is actually talking about Ma'aser Sheni. The Ma'aser Sheni has to be brought after to Yerushalayim, and it can't be eaten outside the walls of Yerushalayim and any of the gates of your cities. But the Gemara, the Rabbi Yosi here brings a limud from another place where it uses the same term. Well, there's another pasuk where it speaks about Ma'aser Ani, and it says Va'achlu b'sharecha v'saveyu, that you're going to give the Ma'aser for the poor people, and they're going to eat in their gates and be satisfied. So Ma'alalon Ma'aser Ani, when it says there the term b'sharecha, it's referring to Ma'aser Ani. Afkan Ma'aser Ani. Here as well, when it says the term Leisucha lechol b'sharecha, it's saying that you're not allowed to eat from the produce if you did not give the Ma'aser Ani. The Torah says leisuchal, that you get the malchus. That's the lav that you learn out from here. Now, the chiddush about the Ma'aser Ani is when it comes to the truma is only allowed to be eaten by a kohen, not by a zor. And Ma'aser Rishon, which belongs to the Levi, actually has no kedusha to it. But the Ma'aser Rishon that belongs to the Levi, anybody can eat it, but there hasn't a trumas Ma'aser. There is that tenth that has to go to the kohen. And also, when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni, you have to eat a dafka in Yerushalayim. When it comes to Ma'aser Ani, it's a Ma'aser that you have to give to an Ani. It's money that belongs to the produce that belongs to the Ani, but has no kedusha in it, and there's no conditions about where and when it can be eaten. You can be eaten anywhere. So you may think that if you didn't give that Ma'aser Ani or separate the Ma'aser Ani, maybe over here the law wouldn't apply. And that's the chiddush over here that it says that even regarding Ma'aser Ani, we learn out from this b'sharecha that the law applies as well. So Rav Yosef says, Ketanoi, this pointer of Rav seems to be a machlokes Tanoim. Because Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein tzarich likres es Hashem al Ma'aser Ani shel Dmai. There's no point, there's no reason that you would have to call a name, or that means to designate the Ma'aser Ani when it comes to Dmai. What's Dmai? So Rashi here brings the takana of Yechanan Kohen Gadol, the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, where he saw in Eretz Yisrael that Yidden were not separating Maasros. So he made a takana that any produce that's bought from an Amma Oretz, and these Amaratzim, they were careful with separating Truma Gedaila that belongs to Akayin, and if you eat from the Truma Gedaila, you chayiv misa b'dei Shamayim, that they were careful with. But the other Maasros they were not careful with. So therefore he made the takana that anytime you buy from an Amma Oretz, you have to separate the Maasros again. Okay, so that's the Ma'aser Rishon, and then the Ma'aser Sheni, and so on. Okay, so from the Ma'aser Rishon, you have to the Trumas Ma'aser has to be separated for the Kohen, and then the Ma'aser Sheni you have to take to Yerushalayim. And then the question is, what's with the Meiser Ani? Those years, the third, the sixth year that you have to give the Meiser Ani, do you have to separate Meiser Ani from Demai as well? So Rabbi Eliezer says, Meiser Ani does not have to be designated at all. You don't have to you don't have to be Kairis Hashem at all on the Meiser Ani to say that this area or that thing it belongs, that you designate it, like Rashi says, on the north side or on the south side, that this belongs to the Ani. It's not necessary at all to designate it. Now, obviously, you don't have to give it to the Ani, right? That's what it says here. Chalal, this whole halacha by Demai, you don't have to give the Maisa to the Levi. Or, why? Because when it comes to the question of, do I owe this Meiser to you? So you tell the Levi, it's only a suffix, it's the Mai, but it comes from a Aretz, it's a suffix. If you want to collect it from me, bring a raya that the Meiser wasn't separated before. So you don't have to actually give it to the Levi, but you're going to have to separate it, because in that Meiser Rishon, there's another tenth of it that belongs to the Kohen that you're not allowed to eat. Or by the Meiser Sheni, because it's a suffix, you might have to bring it to Yerushalayim, so you have to separate the Meiser Sheni and bring it to Yerushalayim. But you don't. But there's no. As far as the money matter is concerned, over there we would say you don't have to give it. But over here, when it comes to the Meiser Ani, we're not talking about giving it to the Ani. You don't have to give it to him, because again, but what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is you don't even have to separate it. B'chlal. There's no the concept of Demai that requires to separate again does not apply to Meiser Ani. Chachamim say, Kaire es Hashem, that you designate by name and you say, this area is going to be Meiser Ani. And then by doing that, then now it's not anymore Tevel, and Ve'en tzarich lahafrish. But it's not necessary to separate it. And then you can keep it, you can actually eat it. Because, like I said, the Ani has no rights to take it from you, because but you do have to be Kaires Hashem in order that you should be allowed to eat it, misafik. Okay, so now, what's the argument here? Whether you have to separate Meiser Ani by the Demai, which is a suffix. So says Rav Yosef, my lab, the arguing in the point that Rav said, the Mar Sovar Vadai Toivloi. The Chachamim say that Meiser Ani, when in a case where you definitely did not separate Meiser Ani, it's Tevel, the Yechayiv Malkus for this. And because it becomes Tevel Mamish, the Yechayiv Malkus for it, so it's a serious thing. So therefore, in a case by the Demai, where it's a suffix, we're machma that you should be Kaires Hashem, that you should be allowed to eat it. But Amar Sava, but Rabbi Eliezer says, Vadai, when you definitely didn't separate Meiser Ani, ain't it Toivloi? It does not become Tevel. So if in a case where you definitely didn't separate it, it's not Tevel, and you wouldn't be Chayiv Malkus if you ate from it, so in a case where it's a suffix, Chachama were not machma that you should have to separate it. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye says to Rav Yosef, that's not the basis of their machlekes. And he proves it, because Ihachi, if that's the case, why are they arguing in this kind of case where it's demai, where it's a suffix, whether we're going to be machmer that you have to separate the demai for the suffix, the Meiser Ani that is, for the demai, which is a suffix. So let them argue clearly about this halacha that Rav said. If one didn't separate the Meiser Ani from his produce, is it tevel, is he chayiv malchus for this or not? So that's not the argument. So Elo, the Kul Alme, Vadai, Toivloi. Everybody agrees to what Rav said. When you don't separate Meiser Ani and you eat from this produce, it's Chayiv Malkus, it's Tevel, like any of the other Meisers that were not separated. But B'hacha Miflagi, here, the argument between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is something else. Mar Savar, Rabbi Eliezer holds, Le'nechshudu Amei Aretz al Meiser Ani Shel Demai. The Amei Aretz are not suspected that they didn't separate this Meiser Ani. In the case of the Mai, there's no suspicion that they didn't separate this. Why not? Kivin the Mamainuhu. Over here, it's all just a money matter. So Afrushim Mafrish. So therefore he's going to separate it. What this means is, when it comes to Meiser Ani, this Meiser Ani, there's no element of Kedusha to this. And there's no mitzvah that you have to do with it. It's just a matter of separating and giving it to the Ani. So what happens if the person that owns this produce separates it, and then he doesn't give it to the Ani? So he's stealing. He's stealing from the Ani, but he already separated the Meiser Ani. The produce becomes mutter to eat. So even the Amaratzim, so they're going to separate the Meiser Ani, and then they'll keep it for themselves. True, they're stealing from the Ani, but they're going to separate the Meiser Ani. Why not? Why shouldn't they separate it? But when it comes to the other Maisres, when it comes to Maiser Rishon and Maiser Sheni, the reason why they don't separate it is because if they're going to separate it, they don't want to be bothered with separating it, because if you're going to separate Maiser Rishon, what happens? So now you have the Trumas Maiser that must be given to the Kayin, and they're not allowed to eat it. It has Kedusha in it. That they don't want to, that they're afraid of. It's not just a money matter. It's not just a matter of stealing. The stealing from the ani, that they're not concerned about. They'll steal from, they'll separate it and then they'll keep it for themselves. But by Maiser Rishon, because it has in it the Trumas Maiser that belongs to the Kain, and there's a Isser, there's a Kedusha in it, that they don't want to separate. And the same with Maiser Sheni, to separate the Maiser Sheni, and then they has in it the halacha, the mitzvah, that you must eat it in Yerushalayim and you can't eat it anywhere else, that they don't want to do. So therefore, regarding the other Maisers, there's a suspicion that the Amaratzim don't separate, but when you get to the Maiser Ani, there's no suspicion for this. And therefore, the Blazer says, by Dma, you don't have to separate. But for Rabbanan Savri, however, the Rabbanan hold, Kivin the Trichalei Milsa, since there is still a bother involved with this, even if they could just simply separate it and then keep it for themselves, because they don't care about the stealing, and therefore they can separate and keep it, but still there's a bother involved in this, Salei Mafresh. We actually are suspicious of the Amaratzim that they don't separate, even the Maiserani. They're not interested even in this bother either. The Mefarshim actually asking this. Well, what's this tircha? What's the tircha le'milsa? The Gemara just mentioned before. All you have to do when you separate ma'aser is kairas Hashem. It's just literally verbally. You stand there and say, this section of produce on this north side there belongs to the ani. That's it. It's separated, and then they can go and take it for themselves. That's stealing from the aniyim, but they separated it. So what's the big tircha here? So some of Farshim say, apparently this itself, the Amaratzim don't know this halacha. They think, that if you have to separate it, then it's not just verbally, but you have to actually take it and put it in a different place. So they think it's some kind of a bother. And they're not interested in this bother, and therefore they don't do it at all. And therefore Chachamim say that by Dmai, it is necessary to separate the Maiser Ani again. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, Kama yoichel min tevel v'chulu. So regarding the Isser of Tevel, how much would one have to eat from this tevel to be chayiv malchus? So Rab Shimon says even a mashu, any small amount. And then the Chachamim argue on that and say that it has to be a kazayis. Says the Gemara, Omer Rav Beivai, Omer Rav Shimon ben Lakish, he said in the name of Rav Shimon ben Lakish, the machloik is bechita. They're arguing in a case where it's a kernel, a full kernel. Over here, the argument is, if this kernel is smaller than a kazayis, it usually is more, it's smaller than a kazayis, and that's a mashu, would you be chayiv for eating this, malchus? Aval bekemach, but if it's not a kernel of wheat, but it was ground into flour, so divrei hakol kazayis. Here everybody would agree that the amount to be chayiv malchus would be a kazayis. Rabbi Yirmiyah Rab Shimon ben Lakish, but Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rab Shimon ben Lakish, no, kemachloikis bezu, kach machloikis bezu. Just like they argue about a case if it's a kernel, and if it's flour, it's the same machloikis, according to Rab Shimon, to be chayiv malchus, even if you eat a mashu of this tevel, doesn't matter if it's a full kernel or if it's flour. Says the Gemara Tanan, in the Mishnah there's a continuation of the discussion between Rab Shimon and the Chachamim, and it seems to say very clearly in the Mishnah what the basis of Rab Shimon's opinion is. So the Mishnah said, Rab Shimon says to the Chachamim, do you not agree to me? If a person eats an ant, which is a full barrier, an ant, Kolshu, so then even if it's very small, Shu Chayev, that he'd be Chayev for this, and therefore he says the same should apply also regarding the untithed produce as well. So Amrullah, so Chachamim answer, well, over there by the Namala, the reason you're Chayev is Mipnei Shu Kibriyasa, because it's a barrier, it's a full creature as Hashem created it. Amalahen, so Rab Shimon argues and says, if so, Av Chita Achas Kibriyasa. One kernel of wheat is also the way it is, the way Hashem created it. That was the argument of Rab Shimon. So what do you see from the Mishnah? Chita if it's a kernel of wheat, there is where Rab Shimon said that if it's a mashu, yechayev kemach loy. But if it's now flour, it's not a berya anymore, then even Rab Shimon would agree that it has to be a kazayis. So how could Rabbi Yirmiyah say machlokes bezu, kach machlokes bezu, that they're arguing in both cases? So says the Gemara, no, that Rab Shimon is not actually explaining his own opinion. Rab Shimon is saying this argument to the Chachamim according to your opinion. Lididi, according to my opinion, even if it would be flour as well, it doesn't matter. With a mashu, Yechayev Malchus. According to your opinion, that you say you need a kazayis, you should admit to me that at least in a case where you're eating a kernel, where it's one full kernel of wheat that's like it's created, that over there it should be only a mashu and you shouldn't need a kazayis. Now, v'Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan answer to this? Berias neshama chashuva. An ant which has life, and it's a live ant, a full creature that Hashem created, that has significance in Yechayiv, even if it's a mashu. Chita leichashuva. But when it comes to a kernel of wheat, it doesn't have a life to it. So over there, it doesn't have that same kind of chshivas, and here you will need a kezayis. Now the Gemara brings a raya to what Rabbi Yirmiyah said. Tanya Kva said Rabbi Yirmiyah. We learned like what Rabbi Yirmiyah said. Rabbi Shimon Omer kol shuhu lemakis. If someone ate from this b'mezid deliberately, and here he's going to be chayiv malchus, so for this you don't need a shir of a kezayis, even just a mashu. One will be chayiv. Le'omru kezayis, the whole thing that it says the shear of a kezayis to be chayiv, well, it was only said elalein carbon. That was only said if someone ate b'shoigig, and here to be chayiv a carbon chatos, it has to be a kezayis. So Rashi's pshat on this is, why should there be a distinction between malchus, b'mezid, and b'shoigig for a chatos? Rashi says it's a halacha l'moshe misinai. That the din of kezayis, that the shiurim of Torah are all halacha l'moshe misinai, and over here the din of the shir of kezayis that's needed only for a shoigig for the chatos, it's a halacha l'moshe misinai that it's only for the chatos and not for the malchus by a mezid. Yeah, other Rishonim say, I think that the Ritva here brings that when one eats b'mezid, the very fact that he's eating this deliberately, he wants it, and so that means that itself gives it a chshivas, and therefore even a mashal, he would be chayiv. When he eats it b'shoigig, because he wasn't even interested in eating this, didn't realize what he was doing, so there, to give it the chshivas, you have to have dafka kezayis. So there's a shtukol svara as well. So Mishnah ha'oichel bikurim. A person that eats the bikurim, that this is the shivas aminim in Eretz Yisrael, that you take from the first fruits that grow and you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash for the kayin to eat. So one that eats from this bikurim, the kayin that eats from this bikurim, achale karale. Before the Yisrael that brings these bikurim, there are the psukim and Parshas Kisaveh that it says that one has to read Arami Yoivedavi. So before those psukim were said, you ate from it, so it's chayiv malchus on this. Or kache kachem chutz leklayim. The kache kachem that have to be eaten inside of the curtains, that's in the time of the Mishkan, when they have the klayim in the azara of the Mishkan, and same thing also in the Beis Hamikdash, has to be eaten inside of the azara. Or kachem kalem, if someone eats from the kachem kalem that you could eat in the entire city of Yerushalayim, or Ma'aseh Sheni, from the Ma'aseh Sheni that you have to eat in Yerushalayim, you ate it chutz leklayim, outside the walls of Yerushalayim. This case actually was brought in the previous Mishnah. The Gemara will explain why it's brought here again. Hashaver is a etzem b'Pesach haToyer. One that breaks a bone from the carbon Pesach, which is a carbon Pesach that's Toyer. Harezeh loikar boim. So in these cases, you get malchus. Avol hamoiser b'Toyer. One that leaves over from a carbon Pesach, even though it's a carbon Pesach that's good, it's pure. This is the din of Neisar. Or vashover betamei, one that breaks a bone from the carbon Pesach that's now tamei, ain't a like carbon. For this, you don't get malchus. So as we learned already before regarding Neisar, you don't get malchus because it's a lav hanitik laaseh. The Torah says if you leave over, you have to burn it. And by the shover, if you break a bone from a carbon Pesach that's tamei, so Rashi brings the Gemara and Pesachim learns out ve'etzem leisishveru boy. Boy means in something that's kosher for you to eat, not a carbon Pesach that's tamei. Hanaitel ein malabanim. By the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKain, if someone takes the babies or the eggs and he does not send away the mother, Rabbi Yudah loike. So Rabbi Yudah says that there's malchus for this. You don't have the option now to send away the mother after you took away the eggs. And the reason is, as Rashi here explains, even though in the Torah it seems to be saying, so it seems to say that it's a lav anitik laaseh that you have to send away the mother, and if not, send it away now. But that's not how Rabbi Yudah understands this. Rabbi Yudah understands when it says shalech, the shalach is just describing what you should do. That you have to send away the mother, and then you can take the chicks or the eggs. And if not, there's no essay to correct this, and therefore there's malchus. Chachamim say, this is a lav anitik laaseh. If you did not send away the mother, you send away now, and then you don't get malchus. This is the rule called mitzvahs leisas sheyesh ba komasei. Any mitzvahs leisas in the Torah, where the Torah then gives the essa how to correct this, ein chayavin allowed, there is no malchus. In the Gemara before we learned this to discuss barichas what the ze'ah klal is coming to add. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara says it only comes to add one more case. We learned about this already before on Daf Tezayin. This Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. It's a stam Mishnah. The word stimta, as Rashi explains, Rebbe wrote many, if not most, of the Mishnayos without a name, and he's writing it. You should know that this is the halacha. It's a stam Mishnah, and who does it go according to? Rabbi Akiva. Even though Rabbi Yochanan doesn't bring it, it's not brought here any source. So how Rabbi Yochanan knew this? But this as a Kabbalah, that this Mishnah is a stam Mishnah, and it goes according to Rabbi Akiva. The Chachamim disagree, and the Chachamim say Bikurim. When it comes to the Bikurim, Hanoche ma'akevespen, placing it down in the mizbeach, in front of the mizbeach, in the Beis Hamikdash, that is what holds back from eating. And if one eats before that, he gets malchus. But kriya e makevespen, the psukim that have to be said, that Ami Yovid Avi, that is not makev. Even if one, you're supposed to say those psukim, but if one put it down and did not say the psukim, there's no malchus for this. Fragt the Gemara, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that Zu Divrei Rab Shimon stimta, that this tam Mishnah here goes according to Rab Shimon, as the Gemara is going to bring in a moment here, that it's Rab Shimon in a Braisa that clearly says that if one doesn't say the psukim, that is malchus. There is no source that it's Rabbi Akiva that said this. Rabbi Akiva, we don't find any Braisa that Rabbi Akiva said this. So Rabbi Yochanan should have said it. This is Rab Shimon. Says the Gemara, Hakam Ashmalon. What Rabbi Yochanan here is telling you is that Rabbi Akiva can Rab Shimon Sivirale, that he had a tradition that this Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva holds like Rab Shimon. Now, Rab Shimon, where is the Braisa where Rab Shimon says this point? The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, there's a pasuk where it says, the beginning of this pasuk, it says, Leisucha lechol b'sharecha, you should not eat outside of Yerushalayim. And the pasuk goes on and gives a whole list of things. It starts off with Meiser, Meiser the Goncha Seresh Chavitzerecha, which refers to Meiser Sheni. The Meiser Sheni you must eat only in Yerushalayim. But then the pasuk goes on to say, B'chayris b'kar chavitzeincha v'chol nerecha shetidar v'nidvisecha trumas yedecha, a whole list of things. Okay, so now Rab Shimon is going to dash in this pasuk from the end, from the last part of the pasuk going back to the beginning. And the point he's going to say is that from the things that it says earlier in the pasuk, I would already know the other things that it follows in the pasuk. It's not necessary for the Torah to add. And therefore he's going to darshan that the things that it says in the pasuk is coming to teach me additional things, not only in the simple shot of the pasuk. Let's see. So when it says in the end of the pasuk, Trumas Yedecha, so it says this lav of Leisucha lechol b'sharecha, and it says it regarding Trumas Yedecha. What is Trumas Yedecha? Eilu Bikurim. Trumas Yedecha refers to Bikurim, and the reason is because when the Torah says Bikurim, the Lashon Rashi brings the pasuk as V'lakach hakoyin hatena mi yodecha. The kohen takes the baskets from your hands. So the term of Trumas Yodecha, from your hands, is Bikurim. So now Amar Rab Shimon, Ma ba zel lamdeinu. When the Torah here says about the Bikurim that you should not eat it, Leisucha lechol b'sharecha, what is it teaching? Is it coming to say that you're not allowed to eat the Bikurim outside the walls of Yerushalayim? It's not necessary to say this already. Because Kavachaymer mi Meiser Akal. I could know this with a Kavachaymer from what it says in the beginning of the pasuk regarding Meiser. The Meiser Sheni you eat only in Yerushalayim. Meiser Akal like if Meiser, which is more lenient than Bechayr. Or than the Bikurim, that is. It's more lenient than Bikurim, and if you eat it outside the wall, you get Malchus. Bikurim like Kol Sheken. For Bikurim, definitely one would understand that you get Malchus for this. So the Gemara on Omid Beis is going to explain what the stringency in Bikurim over Meiser is. The Braisa here, Rab Shimon says it's Kavachayim, but he doesn't explain what the stringency is. The Gemara will explain. And the same with all the other, the Braisa here is going to bring a bunch of Kavachayims regarding the different things that are said in the Pasuk. The Gemara on Omid Beis is going to explain the svaras behind these Kavachayims. So, haloi ba kasov. So, why does the Torah add trumas yedecha? There has to be an additional thing. The pasuk here is coming to teach that you're going to get malchus for bikurim if a person did not say the psukim on this. And this is where Rab Shimon says, as the Gemara said, that Rab Shimon's opinion is if you don't say the psukim, you get malchus for this. Okay, now as I mentioned, this is the concept of Meina Inyan. Even though the Pshat of the Pasuk is talking about not to eat outside of Yerushalayim, but it can't be saying this regarding Bikurim. It's self-understood from what it says before regarding Meiser. So if it's not needed for that, I say that it comes to teach something else. That you chayev malchus for eating from the Bikurim before one said the Psukim. Okay, now Rab Shimon goes back to the detail that it says in the Pasuk before this. V'nidveisecha, when it says the nedavis, what is it coming to say? Zu taida or shlamim. It's referring to the carbon taida and shlamim that's usually brought as a nedava. So Rab Shimon says on this, Ma bazel lamdeinu. Why does the taida have to spell out over here that you're not allowed to eat this outside the Yerushalayim? Is it coming to say you're not allowed to eat it outside the wall of Yerushalayim? Kavachaymer mi Meiser. Again, I could learn this with a Kavachaymer from Meiser. And the Gemara will explain in Amud Beis what exactly this Kal V'chomer is. So Makos, so the pasuk here is only coming to teach. It's coming to teach something else, that by the Taida and the Shlamim. So the Taida and the Shlamim, the Kainim eat from it, the owner eats from it as well. But when? Only after the spraying of the blood on the Mizbeach. If one eats from this before the spraying of the blood on the Mizbeach, so you get Malkus for this. That's what this pasuk is coming to say. Right? So, that's when you get to the case of Nidveisecha. Now, going back to what it says in the pasuk before this, or B'chayrais, when it says in the pasuk the term B'chayrais, Zeh B'chayr. The pasuk is saying regarding a B'chayr that the simple pshat of the pasuk, it's coming to say that you shouldn't eat the B'chayr outside of Yerushalayim. So Rab Shimon says regarding the B'chayr as well. Ma bazel lamdeinu. What is this coming to teach? Im lach nachotz l'chayim. Is it coming to teach you're not allowed to eat it outside the wall of Yerushalayim? Kavachaymer mi meiser. I can learn it out from meiser. Im lifnei zrike. Is it coming to teach that you can't eat before zrike? Kavachaymer mi taido shlamim. It's a Kal V'chomer. I can learn this from Taidu Shlamim that we already explained that over there it's coming to say that one cannot eat from the karbanis before Zrike. So Halei Kasav Ella La'oichul Min HaB'chayir Afilu La'achas Zrike Shu Leike, that anybody, a Yisrael that eats from the B'chayir after the Zrike of the blood of the Mizbeach, he's going to get Malkus. Why? Because the B'chayir is brought as a carbon and only the Kayin is allowed to eat from this. Nobody else is allowed to eat from this carbon. So from here, you learn out that you get Malkus for this. Right? Rashi here explains regarding this case and before as well that it says in other places in the Torah clearly the mitzvah saseh that only a kain can eat this. Right? B'chayr, the pasuk says b'chayr b'sadam yeh that only a kain, but it only says a mitzvah saseh. Here's the source that it's a lav that you get Malkus. And then when it says in the pasuk b'karcha and v'tzayncha, what is this coming to teach? Says the Gemara, Zuchatas v'asham. The Bekarcha v'tzencha is adding that it's speaking about a chatas and a asham. Now, what is it coming to say? Rab Shimon. So again, Rab Shimon says, Ma bazel lamdeinu. What is it coming to teach regarding the chatas and the asham? Im lo'ilchan chutz l'chayma. Is it coming to say that you're not allowed to eat outside the walls of Yerushalayim? Kal v'chaymer mi meiser. I learn it. I know it as a Kal V'chomer from Meiser, as you said before. Would it come to teach you can't eat from a carbon before the spraying of the blood? Kal V'chomer mi Taida Shlamim. That I learn out from what it says already regarding Taida and Shlamim. To say that you can't eat after the Zrike, Kal V'chomer mi B'chayr. That's a Kal V'chomer from B'chayr that only the Kayin eats it and nobody else. So you don't need to have over here this pasuk to teach me the lav that you're not allowed to eat from this. So over here, regarding Chatas and Asham, it's coming to teach something additional. It's coming to say that that if you eat from the Chatas and Asham, even after the Zrike, chutz l'klayim, outside of the curtains or outside of the walls of the Azara, that you get Malkus for this. So this is the source of Koche Kochem. That if someone eats the Koche Kochem outside of the Azara, you get Malkus. So again, over here Rashi brings that there's an essay that it says this in B'mokim Kodesh Tiyacha B'chatzar El Mayit, but there's no other place in the Torah where there's a lav. This is the source for the lav that one gets Malkus if you eat Koche Kochem outside of the Azara. And then Darecha, the last word that he darshins here in the pasuk when it says Nedarecha, what does this refer to? Zu Oila. This refers to a carbon Oila which is usually brought as a neder. Rab Shimon, so Rab Shimon says, Ma bazel lamdeinu. Why is the Torah adding this? Im lo'ilchan chutz l'chayma, to teach it. You don't eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. Kavachaymer mi meiser. I would understand this from meiser. Im lufnei zrika, to say that you don't eat before zrika. Kavachaymer mi taidu shlamim. Im la'acha zrika, to say that you can't eat after zrika. Kavachaymer mi b'chayr. Im chutz l'klayim, to say that you can't eat outside the walls of the azara. Kavachaymer mi chatas v'asham. I know this from the chatas and asham. So here, regarding the derecha, which refers to an ayla, the pasuk is coming to teach something additional. What it comes to say here is that by the carbon ayla has to be completely burnt on the mizbeach. You can't eat from it at all. As Rashi here brings, the mitzvah saseh, it says, it has to be burnt completely. So here is the lav that if someone eats from an ayla, he would be chayav malchus. That's how Rab Shimon darshan this pasuk. So each detail in the pasuk is teaching me a different din. Why? Because it's all extra. Otherwise, I can learn it out with a Kal V'chomer. And therefore, we say Meina Inyan, and each detail is coming to teach a different halacha regarding different kinds of karbanis. Amar Rav said on this braise, and the way Rab Shimon darshan this pasuk, the Yalda Imei Rab Shimon Taylor. If someone if a mother is giving birth, she should give birth to a child like Rab Shimon. That darshan is this way. But v'loi, if she's not giving birth to a child like Rab Shimon, loy teilet, she should not give birth. This added line. In v'im loy teilet, some Rishonim say to take it out. The Ritva says not to be good as this, because definitely you can't say that if not, the mother shouldn't give birth. Yeah, he should say he's giving a bracha that you should have a child like Rab Shimon. But to say such a sharp thing that if loy teilet, so some take it out. Okay. Now Rava says on this, va'afal gav the islu pirche. I can refute the Kal V'chaimers that Rab Shimon said here in the Braisa. And here the Gemara is going to go through what was the Kal V'chaimer that Rab Shimon actually said. The Braisa didn't spell out what the Kal V'chaimer is, and Rava will explain how we could refute this. So now it starts, my chumre de bikurim mi meiser. The first Kal V'chaimer he said was that bikurim is more stringent than meiser. What is the stringency of bikurim? Sheken asurim lezarim. Bikurim is only for the kainim to eat. It's asur for anyone else to eat. Ma'aser Sheni is for anybody. The Yisrael brings it and eats in Yerushalayim, so Bikurim is more stringent. So on this, Rava says, Adarabba, the contrary, Ma'aser Chomer. There's a stringency that Ma'aser has. Shekain Asr Lo'ainon. A person that has a close relative that passed away on that day, he's not allowed to eat from the Ma'aser Sheni. By Bikurim, that doesn't apply. An Ainon is allowed to eat from Bikurim. So you see that on the other hand, Ma'aser Sheni has more of a chumrah. So who tells you can learn out Bikurim from Ma'aser Sheni? And then going on in the continuation of the Braisa, Omai chumrah de Taidu Shlomim mi Ma'aser. Rab Shimon says that Taida and Shlomim is more stringent than Ma'aser. What's the chumrah? What did he mean? She came to unen matan domim, because it's a carbon and you have to spray the blood on the mizbeach. And ve'emurin, and also the fats that have to be burnt on the lagabi mizbeach has to be on the mizbeach, which doesn't apply by Ma'aser Sheni. Adarabe, but on the contrary, Ma'aser Chomor, I can show you a Chomor that Ma'aser has that does not apply by these karbanis. Shekain tu'unin kesef tzura. By Ma'aser Sheni, if you want to redeem the Ma'aser Sheni, it has to be a properly minted coin with a picture on it. It can't just use any other kind of silver. So that's a unique Chomor that you find by Ma'aser Sheni that you don't have by karbanis. So maybe Ma'aser Sheni is more stringent. Going on in the Braisa, Omai chomre de b'choyer mi taido shlomim. Rab Shimon said that b'choyer is more stringent than taida and shlomim. What is the stringency? Sheken kedushasai merechem. The kedusha of the b'choyer is from birth, from the mother's womb, and which you don't have by the taida and the shlomim. So that's a level of stringency. But Adarabbe, on the contrary, taidu shlomim chamurim. I'll show you a chumre that the taida and the shlomim have that does not apply to the b'choyer. Sheken tu'unin smicha. You have to lean your hands on the carbon before you bring it. On the sachim, you have to add the wines as well. Tnufas chazav v'shaik, you have to lift up different sections of the animal, the chaz and the shaik, before you eat from it, before you makar on the mizbeach. So you see that the taida and the shlamim has a stringency that b'chayr does not have. And further, the next thing he said in the Braisa, Omai chumre de chatas v'asham b'chayr. The Braisa says that there's a stringency in the chatas and asham more than b'chayr. Shekain kotche kotchen. Because the chatas and the asham are kotche kotchem, has a higher level in kedusha. You can only eat it inside the azara and so on. But Adarabe, on the contrary, B'choyer, Chomer, I can tell you that B'choyer has a stringency more than the Chatas and the Asham, as mentioned before, Sheken Kedushasai Merechem, because it's holy, it's born from the womb as a B'choyer, which doesn't apply by the Chatas and the Asham. And the last point, Umay Chumre de Oila. What's the stringency of the Oila? That's more even Mechatas v'Asham, more than the Chatas and the Asham. Sheken Kolo. The Oila has the greatest stringency of all Karbanis, seems to be, because it's burnt completely on the Mizbeach. Adarabe, on the contrary, Chatas v'Asham Chamiri. I can show you that the Chatas and Asham is more stringent. Shekain Mechapri, because the Chatas and the Asham bring an atonement. So the fact that this is a carbon that can bring a kapara shows that it's on a higher level of a carbon, has a greater kayach or greater stringency. And then Rava concludes and says, "V'kulu chamiri ma'ila." And I could also point out to you that all of the cases that we just brought have a stringency that's more than the carbon oila. The ispahu shtei achilas. The fact that there are two different consumptions in the carbon, that's a certain level of astringency. There's the achila of the mizbeach and the achila of the koyanim, or the achila in the mizbeach and the achila of the bailim, which you don't have by the oila. There's just one achila that it's all consumed on the mizbeach. So therefore, you can't tell me that the oila is more stringent than the others. So the whole approach of the drashis of Rab Shimon here in the Braisa to say that you have a bunch of extra things that the pasuk is spelling out because it could all be learned from a Kal V'chaimer, there's a pirche, there's a refutation for all of these Kal V'chaimers. So Ella, if so, what did he mean when he said the Yalde Imek Rab Shimon? That if someone's mother's giving birth, it should be like Rab Shimon. Why? all the Kavachaimis he said are not even true. Says the Gemara, the Lamai, the Svira Leili Didei, according to what he thought, that he did have a Kavachaimer. The way he darshan the pasuk from the end to the beginning, that's what's unique over here. That Rab Shimon didn't darshan the pasuk from the beginning, because if you darshan the pasuk from the beginning, you won't be able to make any of these drashas. When you look at the end of the pasuk and you see that already the pasuk before wrote already these things, and therefore what it says later is not necessary to write. This was the chachma of Rab Shimon, the way he darshan the pasuk, and therefore he said that whoever's mother gives birth should give birth like Rab Shimon. That's the simple pshat of the Gemara. Text over here actually asks on this: what's the big chachma of this to darshan this way? What's the big shvach for Rab Shimon for this? Okay, Text adds something to the Gemara, but but the Kavachaimis itself that he said could be refuted. But there is a discussion in Mefarshim to try to explain what Rab Shimon meant, because he said these Kavachaimis, and there's an answer for these refutations. Okay, but now the Gemara asks another question, another basic question on this whole entire thing that Rab Shimon says here. How could you b'chlal make these Kavachaimis? V'chi mazhirin min adin. Do we ever give a warning for a malchus just based on a Kavachaimer? You have to have a clear warning in the Torah. You can't just give a warning based on a Kavachaimer. There's, besides the concept of a warning, where the Torah has to say loy, a warning, but there's also the actual einish. So there is an opinion that says that regarding the einish, even if the Torah doesn't write clearly the einish, we can learn it out from a Kavachaimer. So, but there's a machlokes about that. We had it before, and the Gemara learns it out from what it says by the Kodesh regarding the Arayis, whether the Torah has to write, especially the Kodesh by a Chaysai, that's Basimai and Basaviv. Okay, so regarding Einshim and Adin, there's a machlokes whether you could give an Einish based on a Kavachaimer. But everybody agrees that Ein Mashirin Min Adin. You don't give any warning just based on a Kavachaimer. So how here is Rab Shimon saying that we have a Kavachaimer, and therefore all these psukim are extra? And says the Gemara, Isura Ba'alma. All it means to say is, Rab Shimon was not saying that there's malchus here for all these cases. What he's saying is, you could use the Kavachaimer to learn out that there would be a Isser, but not malchus. And all these psukim are extra to teach me additional Isurim. That's what Rab Shimon meant to say. But the Gemara asks on this, it can't be true, because Va'amar Rave said, Zor she'achal min ha'oila lifnei zrike chutz l'chaimer. So this is a Zor, he's not a Kayin, and he's eating from an Ayla, and he's eating before Zrike, and he's eating outside the Chaime. Rab Shimon like a Chamish. According to Rab Shimon, there's going to be 5 different Malkusin over here. Why is there 5 different Malkusin? Because he's a Zar, he's not a Kayin. He's not allowed to eat from a carbon. That's one Malkus. And also he's eating from a carbon Naila. He's not allowed to eat from a carbon Naila at all. And he's eating outside of the Azara. He's eating outside of the Beis HaMikdash as well, outside of the Yerushalayim, outside of the Kloim. And before Zrika, correct? Yeah, so he's going to be Chayiv Malkus 5 times. But the question is, why is he Chayiv Malkus for all of these? Chamishi Yisurin have. According to what we're saying here, there is no source for a Malkus. We're learning it out from this pasuk where it's just based on a Kavachaimer and Ein Mazirin Min Adin, so it should just be 5 Isurin. That's one question. Another question, V'ha anantnan Elohen aloikin. Additionally, the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek, where it says Elohen aloikin, and also the Mishnah here before that we just learned about Bikurim. So one of the places that you get Malchus is regarding Bikurim, before you say the Psukim. And when one eats Koche Kochim outside of the Kloim, actually that's in this Mishnah over here also that we just learned. So it says clearly that there's Malchus for this. It's not just the Isser. So how could you say that the source of the Malchus is from this pasuk where there is no clear Azhara, it's just a Kavachaimer, and you're telling me that it's only a Isser? It can't be only a Isser. Elo, so therefore the Gemara concludes and says, no, the answer for this is, Kra Yiseiruhu. This pasuk, it's not only the Kavachaimer. This entire pasuk where it says all these details is all extra. Why? Mechdi, let's see, Ksiv, there's a pasuk before where it says, right, this is all in the same place. Mamish the pasuk before it says Ve'evei Sasham. So you have over here on the side of the Gemara, it quotes the whole pasuk. It says all the details that are mentioned in this pasuk that we're talking about is mentioned in the pasuk before. Ve'evei Sashama. It says Eileseichem, Zuvchechem, Masresechem, Trumas Yetchem, Nidrechem, V'seichem, B'chares B'karchem, V'tzeichem. It says already everything in the previous pasuk, and then in the next pasuk it says again V'achaltem. It says V'achalta L'fnei Hashem V'lekecha. You should read it over there in this place, right? And then so it says already all the details. Now in the pasuk leisucha lechol b'sharecha, it's a little bit further. I feel like about 10 psukim later, it says again, V'achalta b'sharecha, and it goes through all the details again. So why does it have to go through all the details again? Lichtov rachmana leisucha lo'oichlam. The Torah should just write that you're not allowed to eat any of these things. If you want to give a lav to all those things that are already mentioned before, it should just say leisucha lo'oichlam, and that's it, and you have a lav for all these things. Meheder mefarish behu rachmana lamali. Why is it necessary for the Torah to spell out all these things again? So the answer is Elol yichudi luhu lavi l'chol echad v'chad. It's coming to designate and say that there's a lav for each one of these things. That because it already said it all before in the Torah, so we're here, when the Torah is coming to say that you're not allowed to eat chutz l'chayma outside the walls of Yerushalayim, it's coming to designate and say that there's a lav not to eat it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. And that's why it has to say all these things separately. Okay, now here there's a big issue with the conclusion of the Gemara. Just bekitzer, as you see here, there's a very long Taisvis, one of the longest Taisvis in Shas, and Rashi addresses this a little bit also, that the answer of the Gemara only explains regarding the Bikurim or regarding Toida and Shlomim that the Rav Shimon is saying in the Braise that here you have a lav for eating it outside the walls of Yerushalayim. That's extra. The pasuk that it says a special, so you could say that the special lav in the pasuk, in what the pasuk is saying, it's not necessary to spell out befedish. It's spelling it out befedish to say that there's a lav for this. But the other details that it says there in the pasuk, that Rav Shimon darshans regarding not eating it outside the kloyim and regarding not eating it before zrika, all those things, that's still based on a kal v'chaymer. And the Gemara before said that based on a kal v'chaymer, ein mazhirin min adin. So that's still a problem, even with what the Gemara says here. So Rashi over here says, anachanami, when it said before that there's 5 malkusin, according to the conclusion of the Gemara, you can't say that it's 5 malkusin. It's only 5 yisurim, but you can't get malkus for all of them. She brings regarding eating kachim outside of the azara, there's a different pasuk for that. The basa basada terefa loisachelo. That's really the source of that malchus. But regarding bikurim as well. Bikurim actually is included in what you learn out of here in this pasuk that it's miyachid alav. But regarding the other things over here, there's really no malchus for all of these things. The Gemara really doesn't answer the question that it asked. Okay, Taisus asks Rashi. Taisus has a whole different way how to learn this Gemara.